Hopefully you can all hear me. It's very slightly odd with the microphone down. But anyway, sustainable design. I thought I'd talk about something a bit different today, and it would be very easy for me to come and talk to you about buildings, but I thought I'd start with cars and vehicles. And this is a Bugatti carriage from 1930, horse-drawn Bugatti carriage. And what I think is interesting about this is that by 1935, Bugatti had created one of the first electric vehicles. And you'll see up there 28 kilometers an hour. So they moved from the horse, 1935, from 1930 to 1935, up to 28 kilometers per hour. By 1938, Bugatti had moved to the Atlantique, and the Atlantique was then doing 120 kilometers an hour. So within the space of 8 years, Bugatti had mastered going from 0 to 120. And today, we have the Bugatti Veyron, which is doing 267 kilometers an hour. So you might ask, why am I interested in this? Well, the answer is that what you can see is the speed of development, the speed of change has been enormous in the car industry and has been enormous in terms of transportation. However, the speed of change in the building industry has been appalling. And this was a very important part of it, because the advent of oil, the combustion engine, and the desire for performance is what has pushed forward the car industry. And unfortunately, what it's done to our urban environment is it's moved us from an environment where we were in touch with nature, where we moved around the world in touch with nature, to one where we started to pollute and eventually created urban environments like this. So the destructive nature of the development and the speed of that development on the urban environment has been huge. And my feeling is that actually where we've ended up is that the balance between life and nature is something that we've now lost, and that's something that we need to think about, and that's something that we need to think about how we're going to deal with in the future, and how this balance is going to affect us in terms of the future. Because if we don't change that balance, all cities are going to end up looking the same. And all cities, what we've managed to do with cities is we've managed to engineer them to a point where we can control everything, we can control the environment you live in, but are they nice places to live? And are you getting that balance? Interestingly, if we go back several hundred years, the other dilemma we have is that when you look at the fabric of the buildings and you look at the construction techniques, that when we look around us today, the construction techniques that we're using are still in the Dark Ages. We haven't progressed at all. Compared to the vehicle, we've got stuck. We're stuck in the historic world. And interestingly, it was a Mazda 10 years ago that we really started, I think, to look at construction, and we'd started to challenge some of the issues. And I think we're at a very interesting position today, because some of the issues that started to be challenged at Mazda are now becoming a reality and are becoming much more of the moment than they were 10 years ago. And Mazda did look at the balance between the land you took and the urban environment that you created. So with 100,000 population, the balance on the 7 square kilometre site was how much could you build relative to the site and still support what you were building on the site. And that was the basis of the first thesis of the master plan. And you can see that in other cities, for example, Venice, where Venice is supported by its rivers, by the canal, and how that relates to the people and the population that lives there. And that's something that we've been doing a lot of work on recently. And that is, of course, supported now by new technology, and lots of people have focused on the new technology, whether it be the photovoltaic cells, the smart metering, the PRT systems that are available. But actually, and again, the PRT system in Mazda, when we did this, or the first autonomous cars, 13 autonomous cars running around Mazda, 10 years ago, nothing existed. Now, it's all absolutely in the media every day. And it's really that produces, if we can solve these things, if we can begin to think about how people interact with the environment and how the environment interacts with people, we get better environments and we get better places for people to live, and the technology then enhances how they're living. And what we've shown at Mazda, and these are tests that we carried out looking at radiant temperatures at Mazda, what you can see is on the same day in Abu Dhabi versus Mazda, the radiant temperatures are massively lower because of the urban environment in which we've generated from the planning of the city. But what has happened in the last few years is that we've seen a growing number of developments, and we've been approached for a number of developments across the world, where developments are getting larger and larger. And the question that we had was really, what size of development do you need until the infrastructure begins to meet the requirements of the development? When does it become economically balanced? Because it's the economics of a development that is critical for it to be a successful model. And actually what we believe and where we've come to and concluded is that actually the developments are still too small. And actually what we now believe is probably you need a development of around 200,000 in terms of population in order to begin to kick in the level of infrastructure that's needed to start to generate and make economic sense of these developments. And interestingly, we looked at the London Borough of Islington, because we thought if you took a borough in Islington and you said, how does a borough sustain itself? What numbers of population? When you start to look at the London boroughs, what you find is this magic number of around 250,000 population. And when you start to look at job generation, residents, the number of schools, the number of doctors, the infrastructure that links all those things together, you begin to get something which economically is viable for a borough to run. And what that does is it means that also when you start to look at those numbers of people in relation to some of the systems that you can then implement, once you get to the 200,000, you begin to get economic advantages from the waste to energy, from the renewable energy, from systems which then make sense from a financial point of view, which then sustain the developments. So the conclusion of this was really, you need to be over 200,000 population if you're going to make something which is sustainable. Moving on, our next subject, the fabric of the buildings. And again, going back to Mazda, Mazda started something which was to say the buildings were not generated from a point of view of an aesthetic, from an aesthetic architecture. The fabric of the buildings, the way in which the building elevations were generated, were really from the function within. And so they have different functions within, different elevations are generated because of the way in which they're working thermally. And that is going to be very important. That is the thing which is generating the architecture. That is the thing that we think we should focus on as we go forward. And actually it also raised the dilemma about, do you put your renewable energy on your buildings, or do you take the renewable energy off your buildings? And the conclusion, our conclusion between phases 1A and 1B of the Mazda Institute was actually to take the PV off the roof and do the 10 megawatt solar plant, because it was easier to maintain, it was easier to clean, it was easier to run. And so our utility is better to run as a separate utility than combining them with buildings. And once again, if you get bigger projects, you get the ability to separate your utilities out, and you begin to get efficient utilities. And that's been shown with the development here of Shams 1, the 100 megawatt solar field that's followed on. So going back to the car industry, I think the other interesting thing is, of course, how we build and how we manufacture our buildings. And you can see from the coach builders through to the assembly plants of Toyota back in 2016, and today this is a plant we've done for McLaren. The way in which vehicles are being constructed is becoming almost like a surgery. It's almost like a medical environment for the creation of these vehicles. However, we're still creating buildings in the Stone Age and completely ignoring the ability to mass produce and the ability to manufacture off-site and bring to site. However, what's very interesting is that the vehicle industry is also promoting products which are sustainable. You take the Toyota Prius, a sustainable vehicle, electric vehicle. However, then you have to ask yourself the question, how long is that surviving in comparison to the old coach-built Rolls-Royce? And what you find is the old coach-built Rolls-Royce, which was built of quality construction, 90% of Rolls-Royces are still in existence, and 90% of them are still on the road. The average Prius life is something between 3 and 5 years before it goes back into a recycled mode. So how can we deal with that, and how can we deal with that in the built environment? And we've started to try to do that. This was in Shanghai, going back now 9 years. In Shanghai, we built the UAE's Expo Pavilion in the World Expo in Shanghai, and probably some of you have seen that we've actually moved that building. That building was deconstructed, moved back to Abu Dhabi, and is now sitting in Abu Dhabi as an exhibition venue. And again, in 2 years ago now, in Milan, the UAE's pavilion, we really focused more on how to move the building, how to deconstruct the building and move it back here. So the building in Milan, the building under deconstruction. It's difficult to know whether it's a building under construction or deconstruction at the time, but under deconstruction, and now back today in Abu Dhabi at Masdar. And within the next few months, we'll be back up and the new visitors centre for Masdar. So how we keep our buildings and give our buildings a longevity, whether they're in one country or another, it's all possible. In Dubai, we've started to look at another project, which is this is the new design district, the creative community in Dubai. And what we've been looking at is a componentized system in which people can begin to create their environment that they live in. So we create a framework environment in which creates a basic modular system, and that modular system then can be adapted and changed as the inhabitants move in, and as the environment, the creative environment changes and builds. And of course, all of this is also designed for deconstruction. So all prefabricated, all off-site, and all assembled on-site, with pre-construction. 8 years ago in Abu Dhabi, we tried another experimental project. This is a project that Foster & Partners led ourselves. And this was really to say, could you build a home? Could we build a home that would last, and could we build a home that was manufactured and could we build 1,000 homes in a year, and with higher performance and higher ratings? And so we looked at off-site construction, prefabrication, and we assembled this home, which is just outside of Abu Dhabi in the desert, sitting there. And this was built. This was the home when it was completed. It takes 56 days to build, and this was completed 8 years ago. That's what it looks like today, and it's had zero maintenance, pretty well zero maintenance over the last 8 years. And you can see from the images, if you build, and if you build in the right way, and if you build off-site and you build in factories, you can get a better finish, you can get a better building, and you can also get longevity. That building can also be taken apart, it can be totally recycled, everything can be separated out, and it can go back into the grid of materials. Is it sustainable? Yes, it's the high performance, it's a super high performance building. From everything, from all of the technical systems are on it, and this would give you in Abu Dhabi, we believe, a five pill building. What we did was we also looked at the building. We took the principles of that process, and this is using exactly the same components, same thinking, but this is now in Panama, where we explored it more with starting with villas, low-cost villas, moving up to terraced housing, and then into multi-use buildings, offices and residential apartments. And in Wales, low-cost housing in Wales. This is a terrace scheme in Wales, in Ebbw Vale. And the message from all of that is that we mustn't forget the past, though, and that the past and the present are very important to bring through, and the passive systems need to be put back into the buildings, because yes, we can engineer the buildings, yes, we can produce the buildings with a perfect environment inside, but if we don't remember the past and we don't remember the passive systems, we lose this balance between nature and architecture. Ooh. The trouble. So what's the future? Well, the future needs a new. So on the moon we're working with the European Space Agency, looking at laser sintering. On Mars, we're looking with NASA at taking laser sintering another step forward in terms of habitation of the outer planets. 3D printing, we believe, is something that needs to be explored, and we're exploring it in more detail. Robotic creation and fabrication of elements for construction. And finally, this is a film that we've just produced with Nissan. This is the Nissan Leaf, and what we were exploring here was how the vehicle may interact with buildings in the future. And with the advent of autonomous vehicles, that you can park your car and your car can move itself during the night to a new charging point, and so cars can switch around themselves and charge the cars, and then how the car may actually begin to plug in, and how we may share energy with the buildings and share within the existing fabric of our streets. There's a study being done in London, and connecting up to in-house systems, and then recharging and using the recharging in the office space, and tying the vehicle and the car together, with the idea of creating a city which is totally integrated in terms of its design and engineering. And so what's the future? Well, I think the future is that we've got a new audience. The children are the new audience, and these are all questions that we should move on. Thank you.